But I think you begin to recognize when somebody has, maybe for the first time in a long time, or maybe first time ever, is able to sit down and really be heard by someone and have their complete attention, even just for a few minutes. It's amazing how much that can open somebody up to recognize I'm loved and appreciated by somebody else. And I think that can be really a key factor in pulling somebody out of a suicidal point within their lives.
4, 3, 2, 1.
We gotta work on the problems. We gotta link up to solve them. We gotta keep on evolving. Gotta be side by side. Give it up. Gotta be side by side. Everyone. Gotta be side by side. Yeah. We gotta be side by side. Gotta be side by side.
Welcome to Talks with Tatum. I'm Michael, and it's a side-by-side podcast. And today's a really, really special day. I know I say that a lot, but this one's really, really special. We got a guy that I've known throughout the years and who I've always enjoyed talking with. I've always enjoyed his presence, not just because of the wisdom that he brings. And I can say that every single time I've ever had a conversation with him, I've gone away with some new knowledge, some new understanding of the world, but for the exuberance that he brings into the world. And you can't leave an interaction with this individual without feeling like your cup got filled, without feeling like you have a new positive outlook on life. But Dr. David Wallace, so happy to have you here.
Thank you, Michael. You're very kind.
No, just telling the truth. You're a special person. I mean, your laugh, your smile, and contagious. It's super contagious. And you have an interesting life and an interesting, story overall. And you started this journey of helping people, of being kind of a light in communities of need on the ministry side. And how did that all come about of your call and your walk into ministry?
Yeah. Well, I grew up in a minister's home. You know, my dad was a pastor. It happens. It does happen, yes. And, I realized years and years later, my dad really was a minister who reacted in his upbringing against what he'd been raised to see, really, in some ways, because his family, his dad, had been the owner of a roadhouse, if you can imagine.
Okay.
And that wasn't all he did, but he was in the Navy. He was a chief petty officer in the Navy, swaggering kind of guy.
Yeah.
He did truck farming. He raised livestock. So I don't think they had really cattle, but I know he grazed rabbits at one point. Did some of this agriculture-related stuff, but at one point in his life, he did have a roadhouse, and my dad grew up in that, even to the point of talking about the time when he was an early teenager, of being the one who, because he had a good bit of a mechanical ability, he was the one who his dad put on fixing the slot machines for the roadhouse. This was all illegal. I'm talking, it was totally illegal. Even he talked about when they knew that the feds were coming by, the revenuers, as they called them, the people who handled all that kind of stuff I don't know, maybe in some state level, probably federal, they would hide the slot machines under his bed. So of course this was in a day when they were these little bitty machines about 1.5 foot high, just little mechanical things, and they hid him under his bed. So he grew up in that kind of environment, and so he reacted pretty strongly to that. Now my dad was not a super conservative, and this was a conservative denomination overall, but he was more. I remember him preaching about. It's not so much what you believe, it's what you practice, what you actually do to be positive in the world. And he did a lot of that. I mean, he was very, very helpful in helping other people, both with his ministry directly, in a sense of spiritual guidance and that sort of thing. Of
course.
But he also did a lot of things to help people in a practical sense. You know, he built things for people, helped people with house problems who couldn't afford to pay for like roof damage or something like that. He worked on building a lot of churches and other places, but he was always helping somebody, you know, with practical things along the way. So I think it was a pretty good solid upbringing that I had. It was the kind of thing though that I kind of got sucked into.
Yeah.
You know, it's like you get absorbed into this.
Yeah.
And it took me years later, really honestly years after transitioning into a different sort of work, if you will, before I realized that I think honestly one of the real reasons I went into traditional church ministry was to please my dad. It did not come to me easily. It was a long time coming. You know, it's like, wow. Now, I don't regret doing that. I don't at all. It wasn't regret. I did for a while. I was kind of mad. I'll kind of tell you why in a minute. But it was a time of reflection later on that I really looked back and realized, wow, that was what that was about, at least certainly in part. Again, I don't regret it. I had an interesting career, if you will, in ministry because had some interesting initial experiences. I don't know if any of the people are out there alive anymore who I'm telling on here or not. I guess I don't really care, but I'm not going to name them, and I'm not going to name the places. But interestingly, I went to a seminary that was very open-minded. It was out of that conservative denomination. I won't name them either.
If you know, you know.
If you know, you know. But I went to a seminary that was their oldest seminary, but it was really a very open-minded kind of place. It was think for yourself. Let's explore theology, the Bible, religion, understanding pastoral care, those sorts of things, in a very open sort of way.
How about that paradox? Was that like, were you expecting that stepping in?
Yeah, I really was. And my dad had gone to that same school, which I think says something about his perspective, not being very, very narrow, even though he came out of a background where you could see him being he was pretty strict in the way he thought about things. You know, he really didn't use the word fun too much. He kind of enjoyed fun.
Yeah.
I mean, he would do silly things and had fun all the time. But to use the word fun was kind of it was very interesting to think about as I look back of how he kind of, he had seen what people who were into alcohol and gambling and stuff like that, what they called fun. And I think he was very much, reactive to that. But on the other hand, he was not totally closed-minded at all.
Right.
It was very, I think I got the perspective from him, find your own way. Although I think he got a little more rigid as he grew older.
As we all do, probably.
Yeah, maybe so. I hope I'm not doing that now, but who knows? Probably am to some degree. But after growing up in that, I went to seminary and very much enjoyed that. That was a very great experience for me. And looking at church history and history of music, church music, and looking at theology, biblical languages, I had some pretty enjoyable times there, although a lot of memorization.
Yeah.
Those. But that experience really was positive. I became a pastor of a church as a seminary student, kind of a weekend only sort of thing.
Yeah. And
it was very interesting to be in this first I'd actually been a youth minister before that in another denomination actually. and one of my own as well in college. But in early seminary, I worked in another church, and then I got this pastoral job. And it was interesting because these folks said, we're a mission of the downtown church. And what I came to find out was they weren't a mission of the downtown church. They were a split. They were a group who split away.
Yeah.
So what I found more and more as we got into it was there's some really good people there. But then there were some who were still pretty cranky.
Yeah.
The sense of just maybe that might have had something to do with the tension that had created this division, that created this new congregation. So that was a learning experience.
Yeah.
But then I had another experience when I graduated. I was a youth minister in a very large church. And I'm moving from state to state here. I won't even name the state. But large church where I found again a sense of, in that church, there was some functionality that was missing.
Yeah, that's
and it was tough. It was tough. I joke about it being 14 months one day in that church. It was, it was a toughie. Some difficult things, not so much aimed at me in any way.
Yeah.
But I saw some things go on that I thought, man, that's not the way to treat people.
Well, it's a strange thing, just in general, as a new pastor, especially as a young pastor, stepping into a place and you have this kind of objective view of things because you're not from this community, right? You haven't been a part of all of these historical things that have happened, and you have these fresh eyes. And hopefully you're carrying some exuberance and some energy and ideas of your own, right? Stepping in, and these people have been living in this world of kind of sameness, and this is the way we do things. This is who we are, and it's just hard to see the log in your own eye sometimes.
Yeah, it was very interesting because I remember very, very well. There was an organist in the church who was. It was a college town, and the organist was a professor. In another field, not related to music, but he was a great organist. I mean, he just, and he had some sense of my struggling. And I remember him coming up to me one day and saying, "Man, I know you're having a tough time here, and I thought I am too. But hey, I got a day job somewhere else, and I realize what you're kind of dealing with, the struggle." He says, "I know of a great church." And I'll name this one.
Name it.
Name where it is. Well, it was a university church in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, close to LSU. And he said, "You ought to put your name in the hat for. They need an associate pastor, and they've got a great pastor there. He's wonderful, and you'd enjoy working with him." So I threw my name in the hat, and lo and behold, that happened. And went there. And it was a really fantastic experience. I was there about 5 years. Had a great time in that situation. It was wonderful people, had a lot of great experiences, and really I had some experience earlier working with college students in the previous situation because I was youth minister and it included college, and we had quite a few college students around. But in Baton Rouge, I really got more into that from the church perspective, although we had a student organization sponsored by multiple churches in the area that we helped support and constantly supported them. We had a lot of students in the church who would come, so I really enjoyed being a part of that, and it kind of got me really cemented into the idea of working with college and university students as a group that I really enjoyed.
And what age are you at around this time?
See, I was probably, when we were in Baton Rouge, I was in my early 30s.
Okay. Yeah, so
right at 31, 32, 3, somewhere in there. And that pastor was an interesting guy because I remember very well. It seemed like everybody was kind of laid back, and I remember we planned a youth trip to a summer camp. It was across states, and I remember after we got back, he said, "I think next time we do this, I really would encourage you to put more structure into the arrangements. And I realized I actually am a pretty structured person and was, but I was kind of going with the vibe that I felt. And all of a sudden it was like, oh, wait a minute. So the next one, we organized it, man.
Yeah.
Made it very organized. We put it together. We had 2 van loads, and we were going to do it right. But he was a great pastor, and the people really loved him. The thing I really appreciate about him was that he was such a champion of racial equality, and really what we would call today social justice. The words were a little different back then, but that was where he was. And he had been a champion of that for a long time. He had been a campus minister before he became pastor of this church. And he was very strong with that emphasis. And God's love for everyone, our need to be more than just going along with the culture of our region, because here we were in the Deep South. And it was very easy white people just to go with the culture.
Right. And the demographics of this church are predominantly white still.
Yeah. It was still predominantly white, almost totally, honestly.
Right. And even Baton Rouge was weird kind of split.
Well, yeah, and you weren't far from KKK headquarters.
Right.
There were all kinds of things going on there.
But that's a progressive message.
Yeah, it was.
And how about you? Like everything that you said about your father, whether using this terminology or not, is very much in the vein of let's love everybody. God, this is what God is calling us to do, and these are the hands that God is calling us to use. And for you to come from that environment and to step into ministry in this way, and then find yourself, after a couple steps in some other places, in this place.
Yeah.
What a blessing.
Yeah, it was, and he was inspiring in that way, this particular pastor. I have to see him as being more out there than my family ever was.
Yeah.
Because we lived in Mississippi.
Yeah.
My parents did not show any kind of disdain or for black people, for people of other races. In fact, they said the opposite.
Right.
But it was still kind of don't ruffle any feathers. It wasn't said. It wasn't stated that way, don't ruffle any feathers. It was just assumed. Right. And that was what I grew up with. And so for me, that was kind of a gradual evolutionary process in my mind, my heart, and everything else. I really felt even strongly in high school, because growing up in a little town, there was nothing to do.
Right.
And you were a preacher's kid, so if you got in trouble, I stayed on the straight and narrow as a high schooler.
It's the two ends of the spectrum, right?
Yeah. So here I was. What do? You go to the library and get a bunch of books to read.
Yeah.
So I read stuff, all about. I read a lot of things that took my mind and took my thinking beyond where I was living. Really early on. But I think the Baton Rouge experience really helped even more with that, because George, this pastor, was just very, very, very strong about God expects us to love every person equally.
And this was received in kind of gracious way from.
Yeah. It was a very open church for that particular denomination.
Yeah. Wow.
And it was a time when, at least there was room for openness there. There was the sense of, this pretty much generally conservative denomination, evangelical in nature, but still priesthood of the believer was a strong element at that point. That sense changed.
It's a different
That's
thing
kind
now.
of lost in that group now. But because everybody needs to conform.
Of course.
But in that day and time, there was more room for that. And I sensed in that particular church a real openness. They were great people. They were very hospitable and kind and friendly and open.
It's funny that even at that point, because especially now you look around and you look at churches across denominations, right? And there's a huge spectrum across denominations. And, all of these churches are in completely different places, right? And it's like, you could almost say that a lot of places could use a shakeup in terms of where do you even fall in terms of how the denominations identify, how the churches within the denominations identify. And it's one of the reasons that you have so many of these non-denominational churches floating around and churches kind of stepping out of the denominations because we just want to do our own thing.
And even splits in big divisions among denominations and having groups and wholesale leaving or staying or separating and some of those issues are important.
Absolutely.
As to what's going on. But at this point, I was talking about my interest in college and university students, and after being there about 5 years, which was a very great time, an opportunity came. Again, I was close to the campus minister who was at LSU, and I think he was part of I believe he was kind of the conduit for the information, at least. Hey, there's an opportunity in Missouri where you get a chance to actually be a campus minister like me, working on a campus. And I know those people, and I think they'd be great to work with and great to work for. So, and at the time, it was wonderful. It really was. So really felt a sense of coming to Missouri and ended up in Maryville, way up in northwest Missouri, at Northwest Missouri State.
Talk about a shift from Baton Rouge.
Yeah, it was a shift. It really was. It was a total shift. Very different culture, very Baton Rouge had some flavors that were different among all the people that were there, and even in the church. We had that interesting Louisiana mix of folks that had, white folks, but ones who grew up North Louisiana and those who grew up in South Louisiana. We had a few Cajun folks, in background here and there. So it was even there, it was a little interesting. But Maryville was monolithically Germanic culture.
Yep.
A whole bunch of folks had immigrated there, mostly from Germany. That particular population, so it made it a lot more an interesting kind of thing, but very different from Baton Rouge. And it was intriguing because I worked in we had an old 4-square house, like you think about 2 stories, it looks just like a big block, built in 1910 or something like that. There are millions of them all around the country, built about that time. 2-story, 4-square. Call them shirtwaist in Kansas City, I think, some of those houses. Because the bottom was done with a different material from the top. Looked like pants and a shirt.
Exactly.
But that's not what we called them. I don't think they ever used that term in Maryville. But anyway, we had this big building that we used as kind of a student center. It was about 2 blocks off campus. And had some good times there. We had... it was intriguing to me because I think the parts that I liked the most, although this was a student group that by nature was mostly white kids. I really worked hard to connect with the international students on campus because they lived a pretty lonely existence. And also the black students on campus, because there was a contingent, mostly from Kansas City, a few from other places, but probably maybe 50 or 60 African-American students at the time. Of course, this is this is 40 years ago, plus, about 40 years ago. And I remember really having some good times with working with both of those groups. With the internationals, we had... a Sunday evening time because all the food service at that time just completely shut down on Sunday evening.
Just leave them on their own.
Yeah, so we had Sunday late afternoon kind of a dinner where actually it got to be round robin, like the Ethiopian guys would come in and fix their famous chicken soup. I can't remember what this stuff's called. It's very interesting because they actually put boiled eggs in it.
Oh, wow.
Cooking. So there's supposed to be something about that really makes it the flavor change, actually putting the eggs in there and letting them, already cooked eggs, boiled, hard boiled, dropping them down in this tomato-based soup, kind of a stew then with chicken in it and cooking it down. And like we had ethnic Chinese students, one from Thailand, one from Singapore, I remember, and they'd fix rice. We had some students from Taiwan. We'll show you how we do fried rice in Taiwan.
Yeah.
Peanuts in it.
Oh, wow.
You want to eat it thin because peanuts. You put it in the fridge and it doesn't taste good then because they get wilty and the peanuts don't crunch anymore. We had fun with those groups and just had a wonderful time of outreach. But with the African American students, kind of taking them under our wing. And I remember one time kind of being kind of shocked because, they faced, it wasn't out in the open, like open disdain, perhaps. There were some international students, black students out of Nigerian background who really had some difficulty, with some of the, here I am going again, professors that expressed some bigotry toward them. And one of them even, who was probably one of the most energetic and positive Christian young men I've ever known, just came to me one time almost in tears and just saying, I don't think I can stand it anymore because my department is just treating me so badly. And we helped him get a transfer to LSU.
There you go.
Because I knew what was going on there. Again, more of a mix that would where he would be appreciated. And I found out later he really did appreciate being able to make that shift and getting some help to find a school he could transfer to as an international student that really worked for him. And there was another one who got into some fake legal issues around stealing something that he hadn't stolen. It was one of those silly things where a track coach had ordered some T-shirts, some shirts, award shirts, like Runner of the Year, in a certain sporting goods store in town. Saw them, said, I don't like the way they look, threw them back, said, I'm going to the other place to get this. So he went to the other place, got his award shirt. And, 6 months later, it's on sale for $1 on the, let's get rid of this stuff out of the back room. And so my student friend buys this from Nigeria. He's just here buying clothes because he just needs something to wear. It's not cold yet. I told him how cold it was going to be in Maryville. His eyes got as big as saucers. So we were able to help him find some real good clothes for winter. But at that point, he was looking for just something to wear, and it was late, early fall, so it was still warm. And he hadn't brought that many things with him. So he found this great sale with all these things the sporting goods store was selling. And one of them said Runner of the Year. And somebody accused him of stealing the shirt of the winner of that award. And it was just a mess, but we had a fantastic lawyer who didn't charge us for the first thing, and I don't think he even charged us anything. Really cool, neat guy. Said, we're going to figure this out, and he was the one who figured out what had happened, and took it all to the judge, and it all got thrown out. But this is the kind of thing you run across, and they experienced this. But I remember really positive experiences of going with the African-American students who were on campus. I think just about everybody went. It was like, they said, you just about got the whole group on this one. We went to a national religious meeting that was basically sponsored by one of the black denominations, kind of a denominational partner. And we went to Nashville, Tennessee with the group. We had a great time. Fantastic experience.
Of course.
So there was all of that. But after Maryville, I was asked to come to really the state office where all of this work was coordinated, and where I worked with people all over the state of Missouri in different campuses in the campus ministries who were staff in those places. And I managed a summer missions program. Really more than that, we did stuff beyond summer.
Right.
It was basically it was a process of fundraising. It was a process of enlisting and getting students to apply, selection, and then actually placing students in jobs that we'd picked up where they would go do summer camp. They would do work in the inner city, St. Louis, Kansas City. They'd go to work with a church in a particular area, working within their church ministries for summer. Or they might go overseas. Might go to, I remember one guy went to Scotland one
Oh, wow.
I think he went for a longer term, maybe a semester program. We had some of that going on too, where they take a semester out and go. But he worked with some folks in Scotland in a church there. We'd send people to Africa, to South America, all over the place, working with churches and doing different things with different groups. So that was a very interesting process of coordinating that among all the different student groups who were funding all of this. They were raising the money to make it happen.
So first I got to ask you this piece, because the youth ministry piece, and also even just being an associate, and as you're doing college ministry, you're doing family ministry, you're doing all of these different things in a church, a corporate church setting, is really a different experience than the campus ministry piece. Oh, yeah. What did you like about that transition to be solely focused on that piece?
Yeah, it was more independent. As anybody who's ever worked in a church as a staff member, pastor or otherwise, knows, you're answerable to everybody on a daily, weekly basis, particularly on Sunday morning. It's like, okay, I'm here to do this, but you want me to pay attention to you right now about that, right? I mean, it's interesting. It's just the way things work. You know?
Yeah.
People see you on Sunday, and then they may not see you the rest of the week. So that's the time they want attention about something. I needed to talk to you about this. And I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying it all just piles in.
Yeah.
But it's also true that you are the employee, if you will, of everybody there. And no matter what the church polity or regulations or rules or how you got there, it's like I answer to all these people. Honestly, with campus ministry, that's not so much the case. And it's like being more responsible to the students themselves and trying to provide something meaningful. Yes, being responsible to the people who are sponsoring the ministry, surely so, and spending time with them, visiting with them, going to their churches, letting them know what's happening, not doing anything out of line, but it's more freeing for me, to be able to really put the energy into all actually what I was doing in ministry, because there's so many things that pull within particularly a larger church. Regardless of what role you have, there's a lot of things going on in different directions.
And you're trying to aim for this alignment that may or may not fit the group of people that you're serving.
That's possible. That can well be. And here it's much more of the leadership. There's an expectation, obviously, of the people who are sponsoring it. But it was a lot more freeing just to be able to, okay, here's where the need appears to be, listening to students, hearing what they say the needs are, and then finding ways to help meet those needs. We quickly figured out there are a bunch of international students here. They don't have anything to do on Sunday evening. We're not here to beat their heads in with Christianity. We're here to be God's hands and feet. We're here to relate to other human beings in a kind and compassionate way. What do we want? What can we do? So it wasn't, just pivot right into that. Let's do something. Let's have a gathering. let's have some food. Let's enjoy being together. Let's get to know people.
And your dad's mindset jumps up again, right?
Well, I think so in a lot of ways. I have to admit that to give him credit, despite some of the other things that I look back on realizing. Of course, he wasn't doing anything negative in trying to kind of channel me into ministry.
Yeah.
I know that's what he wanted. I found
Yeah.
out later that's definitely what he wanted.
Yeah.
When I had shifted a little bit out of that, he was not totally happy with that. I found out later, but that be as it may, it all worked out okay.
Yeah, I think it worked out.
But you're right. It's like there is some sense of where there's a need. Well, that was one of my dad's sayings: where there's a need, there's a call. So that particular work was really enjoyable. Working with a state group, more larger programs, there was a program already in place, and what I needed to do was figure out a way to coordinate it effectively, keep coordinating it effectively. So there was a different administrative skill building process for me there that really was helpful, even beyond congregational ministry earlier.
Yeah.
Was learning how to coordinate and keep different basketballs in the air all at once.
And that one you definitely carried along with you. When do you start to make this shift, or when do you start to come to an understanding of the different ways that you want to serve?
Yeah, and some of this honestly was out of some negatives because this particular denomination I was working for it literally was the handwriting on the wall was already being, you could see it being written already. It was becoming more and more conservative, and some people had already decided some of that. I don't know how much of this I knew. I probably knew some of it about the time, but this was the late 1980s, and I'd enjoyed this job working, here again, about 5 years worth, working in this student missions program and doing a lot of coordinating. But the denomination as a whole that sponsored all this had already become, in some states, much more conservative. And not only that, but to the point of the handwriting on the wall was, all of y'all are going to have to sign something. Eventually it says, this is what you believe, whether you believe it or not, if you want to keep this job. So it was no longer the priesthood of the believer, but it was, the boss says, whoever's in charge. It's very interesting how what was going on then is the same thing that we see politically now.
Yeah.
With kind of ultra-conservative kinds of folk. If you don't believe like I am, I don't want to have anything to do with you.
Had you seen this kind of church politics creep in before?
Not where I was, not in any of the churches where I was, even some of those that were, troubled earlier with some of their internal workings. But that wasn't the issue. Not where I was, but I heard about it in other states where things were beginning to be a lot more rigid and a lot more absolute, if you will, around, issues of, when I was in seminary, we had women who were in seminary planning to be pastors, planning to be seminary professors, and so forth. And all of that got canned in this movement toward conservatism. Women are no longer to be in the ministry. Women are not supposed to teach men. So that was kind of the way it went. And I could see that coming. It hadn't really quite happened in Missouri at the more of the state level. Some of the local groups had already kind of flipped over into that pretty heavily. But it was pretty easy to see this is coming. And all of us talked about it who were feeling the pinch of that and realizing this is not really where we want to be. It's interesting, though, Michael, because, that particular denomination was all I knew. It was like I didn't have any other context. Some of my friends were able to see a way to stay in the kind of ministry they felt like they'd been doing by shifting denominations. Mm-hmm. To me, it just, I don't know, it just didn't fit. I stayed in some of that. I stayed in churches affiliated with that denomination for a while after I left that denominational work. But it really, it got to be institutionalized. This ultra-conservatism got institutionalized all the way up and down the line, pretty much.
Where's your heart in this whole piece? Because, a lot of your identity is tied up. I mean, your dad, the way that you grew up, you stepping into ministry, you serving for all this time under this denomination with this set of principles and this kind of understanding of the world, and all of that gets shaken up, and you're processing that on a spirit level and reconciling what you think you believe and have an understanding of, and then what you're being told. And even after all this happens, you staying around and tied to that denomination. Where's your relationship with God in this whole?
Well, I never felt like I lost my faith.
Yeah.
Although I, eventually stayed away from church for quite a few years because I just felt like I was, as far as the institutional part of it, I was, somebody cut the anchor off, and here we go. I did. I mean, what the positive part of all this move was that my wife Vicki had really wanted to do for some time. She started out as an art major, and she had gotten coursework from as they used one of the old Southern phrases, a passel of schools. She had gotten credit from schools back home where she grew up in Kentucky, and she got credit from Arkansas and from Louisiana at LSU and from Maryville. she almost finished her degree at Maryville. Really was patching it together. She was still working on that, but her interest really shifted because we actually went for some marital counseling early on, and I think that was kind of a catalyst for her because part of what we were struggling as young couples do at the time about quite a few different things, but one of the things that I think she felt was, I'm just always the assistant. Everything you're doing, I'm the assistant, and I want to do something. I feel like there's a calling that, where's my calling? What am I supposed to do? She really got interested in counseling, and actually, I think some of it dawned on her in the middle of counseling sessions because the counselor, she expressed this concern in the counseling experience, and the counselor, who actually was a pastoral counselor in Omaha, Nebraska, of all places, really cool guy. He was an older guy, had been a pastor, but had some counseling credentials as well. And he said, well, what do you think you want to do? And she said, I think I'd like to do something like you're doing. And so that kind of, started stirring her up. And she shifted a bit while we were in Maryville to, she'd done some art courses there, is what she'd mostly done earlier. But she started doing some psychology courses and things that would lead toward that degree more fully. And by the time we had come to Central Missouri, where the state job brought me, she was just short of her bachelor's degree. So she came to the University of Missouri and found I think he was an assistant or associate dean, who in the College of Education, where counseling was housed and still is to this day. And he said, I think we can cobble all these credits together and figure out how to help you finish up your bachelor's degree here and get you going with a master's degree. So she really got into a program where she could kind of bridge the two, and went on into, got her bachelor's in the process, and moved on into the master's program, and got her master's in counseling, and then got a job in an eating disorders unit here that was existent here in Columbia area in Missouri, right on graduation. So that was a great experience for her. It was something that did not last long because the company that was the kind of the franchise owner. I know they really were. I wouldn't say it's not a franchise, but it was a company from California that had units in various hospitals across the country, and they were. She was there about a year or 2 years, and they phased out, and she went into a private practice and continued after she had finished her licensure and all of that. But she really enjoyed this work, and I saw her enjoying it, and I thought, this is a valid ministry. This is something that I have felt some kinship to, some ability in, just in informally doing some level of counseling with students and others. And so I thought I'd do the same thing she was doing pretty much. By that time I could see clients and do what she was doing with community people. But of course it was not to be that way, because what I really moved forward into, she and I both, she had done it earlier than I had, but in her master's program, she had done training in the counseling center at the university. And same for me. This was a perfect place to learn how to do it, because they did practicum. They had good supervision. They had people who knew what they were doing, and gave students an opportunity to actually do counseling in a supervised setting, and actually do that with students, younger students, obviously undergraduates for the most part. And so I went through that program and got really intrigued and interested in this counseling center aspect. Of course, Vicki kept on working in the community as a counselor to marriage and family kind of situations, individuals of all various ages. Some actually as young as I was working with, and younger, and some older. But for me, it really became something that was really a kind of a continuation of the focus that I'd already had in working with students, something I felt very comfortable with, very positive about, and it felt very meaningful to me. So that continued here. So I found, again, a negative that just kind of pushed me away from what I had known, because it became so like I can't be a part of that anymore, because it was so, just put it bluntly, misogynistic and negative and rigid, and so conservative that there was no room for anything else. There was no room for acceptance of people, because some people are going to get excluded because they don't fit into the the denomination claimed not to be racist at the time, and they had some churches that were mainly African American and some churches with mixed populations, if you will. But I don't know, there was always that undertone, and that had been kind of the unspoken undertone all the time growing up in the culture that I grew up in. But the thing about that, and more blatantly, women are not to be in charge of anything except taking care of kids and teaching Sunday school to little people. And then not to even mention anything about any kind of gender diversity or sexual orientation issues. That just has become so blatantly negative among conservative groups, and it still is with that group. So I began to realize this, it's not just those issues. It's like, you will believe and practice what we say you will, or else you're not. See, that was a denomination that had prided itself in priesthood of the believer. Yeah. Well, when that goes away, When you say, no, that's not it anymore, the authorities say that you will believe this. What am I going to do but say, I'm not going there. So that really was, initially that was a really difficult thing. Not a loss of faith. I don't think God ever left, or no, I don't think I walked away from God, but it was, I can't be in this denomination anymore. And that was all I knew.
And, there's like some element of the denominational ministry piece is it can be so rigid, it can be so legislative, it can be so driven by politics, right? And the step outside in this therapy context is really an extension and a continuation, as you say, of the ministry that you were already doing.
Yeah.
And with a lot of those barriers that might have held back some of the ministry kind of stripped away. And obviously, there's counseling best practices and all these things that are tied to it, but a lot more freedom to serve people in the way that your heart really wants to without those barriers.
Yeah. And I really appreciate it. It was prophetic what my boss, who was a woman at the time, working in this denomination, and she saw some pressure later on herself because she stayed longer than I did. But eventually moved out, joined another denomination, and became a pastor in a church. Then stayed and was loved by those people for a long time.
There you go.
But one of the things that she said to me was, when I told her about this, and we had some very heart-to-heart talks about what I saw happening and where I saw my life going as best I could, Mm-hmm. She said, maybe you'll be able to help our students. And she said it that way. Maybe you'll be able to help our students and young adults in a way even better than you've been able to help them here. Mm. And it was really, at the time, I didn't necessarily see myself staying in something that would, I guess I didn't really have a perspective at the time of how widespread the whole thing about counseling centers at universities was. Because I just had never, in my own background, I think we had one counselor who saw students back in the day in the little denominational school where I'd gone to college, but it was no big deal, and people didn't even know about it. So I think I had never experienced that. So I didn't really have any idea about that kind of a stage to do your work, that kind of a context. But that's what really came about for me, because it made perfect sense doing my training in that environment and enjoying that and recognizing, this is a piece that I really like. And so it helped me move on in a way that was constructive. And yet I had to refine myself, as far as where I'm going from here. I worked in that environment for quite a while. In the counseling center, I finished my degree, got all of the credentialing done on that, and then got my license there as a psychologist in that setting, and was glad to get it because I didn't have to pay a cent for it.
There you go.
But it was a training environment, and they're the kind of folks who train people all the way from basic, here you are, a brand new student, all the way up to an advanced student, all the way to an intern who's finishing up the degree, all the way to post-degree working on licensure, which you really have to call yourself that name and to work as a psychologist. Same for a counselor. They're a licensed professional counselor with, basically, you can do that with a master's degree, like in Missouri. Or a psychologist is it's a protected term. It's legally defined by the license. So I got all that finished and worked there for several years, and then really decided I wanted to explore the idea of being a director of one of these things, one of these counseling centers. So I'd been an assistant director working in one area there in the counseling center, testing services. We really didn't do a lot of psychological testing anymore, but we did a lot of the tests that get people into graduate school and professional schools and that sort of thing. So I ran that operation for a while. But then I really decided I want to be a director. So I applied for jobs, started looking around, went for a few interviews here and there, and ended up at Florida Atlantic University, which just was in the.
I was gonna say that's a hot name.
that one point. Those poor guys. one point stayed between them and going on up to the final two, the championship.
They could have used you these past couple weeks.
Well, that was an interesting experience because I went there as director and really got into that work. Had a good boss there, a good vice president that I worked for, African American guy, Manny Newsom. He was really a character. He was a good guy. He was about to retire, and yet he was very, very supportive. And he said, "If you need anything, you come to me." And he did the best he could, and did a good job. I moved from there, though, as a director to the University of Central Florida, which at the time they made the joke was the biggest school nobody ever heard of. They had 61,000 students at the time in Orlando. And it's a big old, huge campus, a big old circle. If you ever see it on Google Earth or somewhere, you'll see this circle. You can find it it looks like a big circle with concentric circles. Northeast of Orlando, on the opposite end from Disney. But they've grown even. Wait a minute, they had 41. How many did I say?
61,000.
That's where they more have been in recent years. They were 49,000 still. But
still a lot.
see, that was bigger than Mizzou at the time, still is. But they were always competing with the University of Florida. That's why they were kind of the underdog school. You know, before I left there, they had more students in the residence halls than UF did. But they were chugging along trying to get bigger than UF, you know, and they were right up neck and neck at the time, because I think UF had about 50,000 at the time. But it was an interesting experience in both of those places, being a director and working with counselors, hiring people, working with social workers, counselors, psychologists, and working with students, all kinds of great experiences. And then the opportunity came back to me. Job came open at Mizzou in the same role, basically going back to the same counseling center where I had trained. And I joked with them even when I was interviewing with them. I think I've done every job here except reception, which is the one job I think I hadn't done, because I'd done several different roles within the center as a grad student and afterward and so forth. Worked on the employee assistance program, which was part of it then. Worked in seeing students and all of that sort of thing. So I came back, and then my last 9 years before retirement were I spent there. And again, I really enjoyed that work. It was a very, very positive experience for me, and one that have always felt was ministry, and something that there were many students that I encountered who. I knew from what they told me, struggling with spiritual things, struggling with church, with what it meant to be a person of faith. And it was, you have to be respectful of people who you're working with, but regardless of who those people were, whether they were atheist or committed Christian or struggling or wanting to struggle or trying to figure out where they were or who they were, I felt like I was able to honor that and be a positive influence for them.
Oh yeah,
in that experience,
absolutely. And
both as an administrator, working with the overall operation, as well as continuing to see students, on an individual basis, and as group. I did a lot of group work too.
How did you settle on the director piece as the role that you really wanted? Was it you liked the directional piece of being able to orchestrate all of these things? Did you, because obviously you still enjoyed the counseling piece of it.
Yeah. I think I really did enjoy the idea of working to bring a group of people together, and as best we could. It's always fun and interesting, but as best we could, getting everybody aligned in a common purpose. Working, supporting them, and I had seen, directors who, in various organizations, who I kind of looked back as my negative, my kind of backstop,
Don't do that.
bounce off examples like, oh boy, oh, that's not the way to do that. That I think of one that I really realized was such a negative was to have somebody who was totally mamby-pamby, totally just let it kind of go, and if you want to get a bunch of counselors and psychologists together, this is hurting cats.
Yeah.
They're people who have very strong ideas, particularly in academia, because when I first started out, actually, a lot of those people were in the academic side of things as well as the counseling center side of things. That kind of had to end as requirements for both got tougher. The jobs became tougher. Faculty getting tenure was tougher, and maintaining it and then working in a counseling center got tougher. And so there was less and less of that dual appointment where they did both, taught classes and saw students. But psychologists and counselors are just very headstrong people. And if you don't have a leader to say, let's pull together, wait a minute, folks, we got to make a decision here.
Yeah.
They would process things until doomsday. They just keep going and going and going. And let's table that until the next meeting. And it got nowhere,
Yeah.
So the director who kind of like, but then the director in some, and I'm not speaking of counseling centers specific because not many people that I know of ever took this route, but the real rigid dictatorial leader, that I'd seen in some other types of organizations, like, no way are you ever going to get anywhere with these people. They will find a way to undermine you and do away with you real quick, if not quicker. So, I really felt like I had a style that was somewhere not either one of those, but was, defined and directional and more motivational, and more collaborative in helping a group of people pull together for that common purpose. Some of it they fully understood in that setting because there are legal requirements about certain things, and there are ethical requirements that fit. A lot of those are tied together with legal penalties for not being ethical. But I think there was a common understanding about those sorts of things. And then when it came to things that are more flexible, then it was guidance and getting input, but working with people to move forward, in a way that really could help the organization meet the needs of the students. And we always had to work with, I try to find good people who knew what they're doing, know what they're doing, and set them free to help guide the process, co-leaders, if you will. And I always encourage my people to get involved, not just in what we were doing inside, because I really early on felt this need for our doing prevention and early intervention work. We can't just sit here and wait for people who are just seriously lost in their problems to come see us. We need to be reaching out to the campus, both helping our friends across campus in faculty, staff, positions, as well as students. Help those friends really learn, and colleagues learn how to know what to do when they find some of these mental health problems, and help us get to those students early when they need to come see us. But also working on the whole spirit and atmosphere of the campus community in a way so as to become a more healthy community, psychologically and mentally related to mental health. So that, one, that faculty and staff can be a better support for students. Students can be in healthier relationships with each other. Who better to help the campus learn what can be done than people have the specific training? So we did a lot of that, and I really encourage my staff to get involved in the campus. Again, pulling together in our common purpose, not we had to keep some kind of sense of a core of how that would look, on campus. Not a lot of rogue operations going on here and there, But yeah, if you got an idea, let's talk about it. But sometimes it's reining back in. Wait a minute, you're committing us to do what? You did what? We wait a minute.
Yeah.
You gotta think about. We got to talk together about the resources necessary, both financial and personnel wise, to get this job done, because that's a great idea. So coordinating and keeping it moving. I don't know. It just was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Sometimes hair-raising, and sometimes I want to pull out what little bit of hair I had left. But on the other hand, it was a very enjoyable role. It's something I enjoyed doing.
So culturally, I don't know if obviously there's a transition that's happening a little bit before the pandemic, but really the pandemic kind of shined this light on, let's really talk about mental illness. Let's really talk about mental health. Let's really talk about self-care and some of these things, and looking out for each other. And so stepping out of that real aggressive pandemic, quarantine, isolation period, we had a lot of people that just weren't in a healthy place.
Right.
And we talk about it a lot, but I'm not sure that we really understand some of the things that are happening. I mean, I see every week, every month, I'm seeing, this person died and this person died and this person died, and we lost another person, and, or drugs and suicide and depression and extreme loneliness and frustration and sadness. And obviously this is these are things that you're really familiar with, but what's going on?
Yeah, it's complex. Some of the things that I see, and I think the pandemic really kind of brought it into focus. It's been intriguing. Some things got a little better during the pandemic, but have kind of restarted, if you will. And I'm not remembering exactly about some of the suicide statistics, but with the way the society has gone, I cannot help but think one of the factors I think is isolation. And we could kind of see this coming back before, and I'm thinking about the age group that I have the most experience working with, in young adults and really older teenagers and young adults, that transition time. We saw this coming several years back, but when the question first began to be asked, with all of these devices, smartphones, computers, computers, then smartphones, computers in your palm of your hand, the internet, all of the things that can come right through that one little screen, that social media, some of the influences of we talked about the old idea of 15 minutes of fame, and here you are trying to get that every time you go online with posting something. Like, I want to be noticed, and then getting slammed and bullied and put down in some cases. People coming back on you for whatever it is you said or did, or, oh, I hate that. You look sick. You're terrible, or whatever they said. Derogatory kinds of things coming on people posting and sharing of themselves. I want to be loved. I want to be cared about. I want to be appreciated. But then it's so much of it has been focused through that one medium. And, how much have we lost in that face-to-face kind of connection, where we really, we have adopted something that's more artificial when it comes to relationships. And yet it's become a primary mode of relationship. How many people out there who are literally married to each other because they met each other online? That was something, not too many years ago that was like, man, that's weird.
It was taboo a little bit, right?
Good grief, man. Come
online
on.
dating, what is that?
What in the world? Yeah. But the isolation that's come. And I think there's something that really kind of shocking data, particularly with young men right now. And I saw a CNN report not too many weeks ago One of the things that struck me was out of a group of young men right now that were surveyed, only 13% said that they had any really close friends out of that whole survey. I believe that's correct. And I think it was 13% said, I have close friends. The isolation and young men not dating, not interacting with anyone, much less than young women. Now how you say, well, say if all the men are, it's like in traditional heterosexual terms. Well, some of these young women are interacting more with other young women. I'm not judging or evaluating or anything. It's just the guys are receding. These young men are backing away from social interaction. And this is something I think we've been concerned about, ever since Dungeons and Dragons ever came out.
That 15 to 24-year-old age group, like suicide's the second leading cause of death for that age group.
Yeah, it is.
And that's alarming. And what we see in terms of consumption, what people consume, and it's one of the reasons that this whole platform even started for me. The whole idea of this podcast is called Side by Side, right? It's that we need to be having these conversations. We need to be in the room. We need to be talking with people that have, wisdom and things to bring to the table and just different perspectives on things and to have the conversation. But one of the most consumed things at this point are podcasts, are people having discussions with each other about learning. And so we yearn for those different perspectives. We yearn for that connection and conversation. But what I'm finding is that we think that we're connected, right? Because you have your phone in your hand, you have all of this social media. I can comment at the blink of a hat. I can like something. I can look at somebody's post and I can know what's going on in their life, right? We're hyper connected, but we're not really connected at all.
Yeah.
And so we're seeing people, I've seen people that, we've lost to suicide and drug overdoses and these things. And they post these cries for help.
Yeah.
But because we consume every single day and, they just posted something like that a week ago or 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago and they're still here. It's like this idea of, I hate to call it crying wolf, but we see so much of it that it doesn't ring any bells in our brain anymore, as though having a conversation with somebody really would, and say, hey, David's not doing well.
Yeah.
You know?
And really, really asking that person, tell me what's going on.
Exactly.
See, this is what we were trying to do when I was working actively in college work, trying to get that spirit going. Let's really talk with each other. Let's find out what's going on with in that case, students who we're working with. But more recently, I've gotten back into some of that, and it's been very interesting to see how much help there is available to help teach us how to do more of that specifically around mental health issues and around things like suicide. So I think about that isolation we were talking about. I think about polarization in the society, things that split us apart, things that really look like they're bringing us together, but maybe not as much as they really could, or maybe certainly not as much as face-to-face. And that brings us back to what can we do? And you're exactly right. We have to be asking each other, tell me about what's going on. Tell me about you. Tell me about your life. And I think about one thing that we've been working with lately is mental health first aid. It's a program that was founded in Australia. They did a lot of research, university research on it, to put it together, and then it came to the U.S. about really a little over a decade ago. And that's when I got into it at the university. We did some of that, and I'd done suicide prevention training in another mode earlier. And lately, I went back and been helping some folks work on sponsoring and promoting this locally to get more people trained. This is a really good method, mental health first aid, and encourage anybody listening to look it up. Mental health first aid, if you'll Google that, it'll take you to sites where you can find out where there's training going on. Missouri has its own site. It was actually the state mental health folks in Missouri are one of the primary national sponsors, interestingly.
Oh, wow.
Although there is a national group as well. So you can go to any of those websites and find out where courses are being offered. So I really encourage that. But getting back into that, it's really helped me remember and think more clearly. We need to be asking people what's going on with them. And part of if you'd like, we can talk a little bit about thinking about suicide prevention.
Yeah, let's
just
do it.
on a very quick but encouraging people to learn more. But thinking about what you can do, because it's not something that's like hands off. Oh my goodness, I can't do a thing. Really, working with suicide prevention starts with simply being aware of some of the signs and symptoms that might be going on with people. Usually suicide, most often, not always, but most often it's associated with someone who's been very depressed. Mm-hmm. Depression and suicide are very closely linked. But when you have someone you're noticing that their changes in their life have begun to occur, they've gotten more sad, they've gotten more despondent. Hopelessness is one of the biggest issues. If they start talking about things where they say, I'm just hopeless, I can't see any future, I don't know what I'm going to do, I can't see going past next week, there may be different ways that hopelessness is expressed, but that's one of the biggest factors that you'll see in somebody who might be suicidal. Thinking about things that people do that are even more explicit, though, somebody giving away possessions. Prized possessions, kind of like they're clearing out, they're liquidating everything. What's going on here? People who, where they're beginning to really isolate in a way that they've not been isolating before. You can see all these things kind of adding up, like something's going on in this person's life. And I would say, you see someone who's gotten more depressed, they look more sad. If you talk to them, I just don't want to do anything. I'm lethargic. I don't know what. I can't get up in the morning. I can't. Maybe they can't sleep. Mm-hmm. They may be, kind of in an anxious turmoil about things. And there's one in particular I think to watch out for. If somebody has been kind of sad and depressed, and all of a sudden everything's fine. Yeah, I got over that. It's great, man. I'm doing fine. The problem with that is it could be a sign they've got a plan and everything's set up. Because you see, there's something about suicide that's important to know. With many people, suicide is not a problem if one is suicidal. Suicide would be a release from the problem. Because what oftentimes people feel is a very deep sense of pain and suffering with what they're experiencing. And it is sometimes inexplicable. Sometimes it has reasons. There can be a traumatic past. There could have been abuse. There could have been trauma that a person's experienced. Any number of possible precursors. There could be bad relationships going on. All kinds of things could have preceded them being where they are. Right. But sometimes it's not even that specific. It's like just a general sense of malaise. Just everything's kind of gone to pot. Everything's gone down. And really working with that as a concerned person, not as a professional, not as someone who has to know and have all these degrees and licenses, but somebody right. who's just somebody who cares. It's important to notice that, this person who may be hurting may be at a point where they are making a plan to the point that they found release from all this. They know what they're going to do and maybe even when they're going to do it. So they're at a point where they're saying, I'm fine now because I'm going to find relief from this by taking my own life. So that's even something to watch out for.
Yeah.
But, looking for these signs, the important thing is if we see these things kind of adding up, I would do this even with somebody who's just depressed.
Right.
And I would ask the same questions. But if I think somebody might be, is depressed. They're showing all the signs of it, and they're letting me know. Sometimes, again, let me back up just a second. It could be something that's not depressive. It could be something that's kind of like angry. It could be something like vengeful. I'm mad at those people for hurting me, and I'm going to get even. And here's how I'm going to do it. I'm going to kill myself. It could be some thought process like that. And here we have all of the stigma, all of the negatives about suicide. And this is where we have to be really careful because, there are things even in our language, the way we talk about suicide. We talk about committing suicide. What else is it that you commit? You commit crimes and you commit sins. And so in the language of churches, even some official doctrine in some churches says suicide is a sin, a cardinal sin maybe. And in some legal backgrounds, at least in history, not so much now, there may still be some jurisdictions, I don't know. But what are you going to do to somebody to prosecute them after they've done it? But suicide was considered a crime against yourself, but it was a crime. So even in our language, so I avoid the term commit suicide and talk about died by suicide rather than committed suicide. So it's important to think about it this way in approaching people compassionately, not in a judgmental way, because our own insecurities about it lead us to say silly things, and not silly things, very stupid things to people.
Yeah.
You wouldn't be thinking about something like that, would you? See, that's not a compassionate approach. That's
Not productive at all.
not productive at all. But our own discomfort with it was, you're not going to tell me that you're suicidal, are you? As we stop up our ears, eyes, and everything else. I don't want to hear it. We're steering them to give us the answer we want to hear. No, we need to go in with the openness to say, they might tell me. But here's the clarity, Michael, I think that's so important. Nobody is going to talk people into being suicidal. So the important thing to do with somebody we think might be suicidal is to ask the question directly. Are you suicidal? Are you thinking about killing yourself? One of those two phrases. Not are you thinking about hurting yourself? Because that goes back to, no, I'm hurt now. This is going to give me freedom from the pain and the hurt that I'm feeling. So harm is it's a holdback. It's a way to think we're easing into it, but we're not. It's important to be direct and just ask the question directly. Are you thinking about killing yourself? Are you thinking about suicide? And in situations like that, if we have, again, you don't just go in and start with that, but what's going on? Tell me what's been happening with you lately. I've noticed how you feel just so much sadder than I've ever seen you before. Anything we've noticed, that's different, that's odd about that person's behavior, that's different from what it's been before, or even if we've never met them before and we've found some connection with them, here's a person who's really having some struggles, to go in and ask what's happening. Tell me about yourself. Tell me what's going on. I want to listen. I want to care, and let them talk. Don't be judgmental in any way, whatever they might say. But somewhere in all of that, especially if things feel like, wow, this is a depressed situation, to ask that question specifically.
So you're entering in with some empathy and compassion, and saying, I see you. These are the things that I see, right?
Yeah.
Which is this feeling of, okay, they see me, they've recognized these things, and then you're going straight to the blunt question.
The blunt question, really, for some people, it's like, finally somebody's hearing the struggle.
Yeah.
Finally somebody gets what I'm struggling with.
And it's like a freedom to potentially get that off their chest and vocalize it and talk about it.
Yeah. Now, just because they're talking about suicide, if you may have somebody comes into your life or is in your life who starts talking about it, there's another myth out there, besides the one that says, oh, if you talk about it, you'll put it in their mind. You can't do that. The compassionate approach is what's so important. And it's very vital that we begin there and draw people out. It's basic counseling skill, honestly, but it's just basic conversational skill. Rather than I can't wait for the next time I can get in and say what I want to say, to just simply listening and having open heart, open mind, open ears. Tell me what's going on. Tell me more about yourself and what you're dealing with. And then as it presents itself, are you thinking about suicide? And if they're not, they're going to tell you.
Yeah.
If you've been compassionate and connecting, well, they may say, no, I never thought about that. No, I'm not there. I'm just really sad. I'm really struggling. And that can well be. And then you can help them get some help they need if they're not getting help already.
Well, I mean, it sounds like, obviously we're talking about this from the realm of, seeing these signs of suicide in a person, seeing the signs of a person really struggling. But these are the basic building blocks for relational conversation to begin with.
That's exactly
But we've
right.
gotten so many steps away from it that, I remember growing up and talking on the phone, right? And you come home from school and you'd call somebody on the phone and you had these conversations. And then quickly, by the time I got to high school, it's a cardinal sin to pick up the phone anymore. We can only text, we can only have interactions in these written ways. Mm-hmm. And those conversations are much more blunt, or they're just surface level conversations. And so the idea of meeting somebody with compassion and having this kind of conversation is foreign to a lot of us. So it's important to lay it out.
And that, what you just said makes it even more vital, because we are talking about a group of younger people on the spectrum in the society who, as you just described by your own experience, don't have are not in touch with how that's done so much. Not that everybody's lost it, and that's not true, but yes, it's like indirect communication, communication through texting is so much more the norm that we've lost touch, and that's why it's so much more important to have some kind of training to help people recognize, hey, we can teach you how to do this. If you care, because I don't think people have lost about caring. That's
don't
not,
know,
that's,
don't know
it's
how.
just how do I talk to somebody besides with this little machine I have here?
But what does that, in your experience, what does that, that compassion of really beyond anything, you're communicating, I see you. Yeah. What does that do for a person that's in this mindset of like, I'm at the point that I'm ready to kill myself? What does that little bit of compassion do?
It's really, I think it can be amazing because being a counselor, I saw it a lot. Of course, a student, as we saw students, they had to have the nerve to come to us in most settings. But I think you begin to recognize when somebody has, maybe for the first time in a long time or maybe first time ever, is able to sit down and really be heard by someone and have their complete attention, even just for a few minutes. It's amazing how much that can open somebody up to recognize I'm loved and appreciated by somebody else. And I think that can be really a key factor in pulling somebody out of a suicidal point within their lives. And it is what happens in the counseling process of helping them pull out of that.
Yeah.
Because it is exactly that process that a professional would use to help pull them out. And that's why, quote, the layperson, as far as mental health is concerned, can be so vital, because these people need that kind of support ongoing, even as they deal with this and learn how to come out of it. If somebody has never attempted before, if they've never attempted suicide, if that can be dealt with and they can find the help that they need, often they'll never go back to being suicidal again. Wow. If they have attempted once, they survived it, but they've attempted, that puts them at a greater risk to do it again or try it again. There is a story, I'm not remembering the guy's name because I've used it his name in a presentation. Years ago, a Golden Gate Bridge jumper, one of the guys that jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge and survived, one of the few, because you hit the water at that height so fast, so it's just so hard that there's really hardly any way to survive. But this guy was 19 years old when he jumped, And he went down head first, and and it hit him right then. I'm going to die. And something in him says, I don't want to die. And he flipped his body over, flipped over so he was going to hit the water feet first. He still ended up with severe back injuries, cracked some vertebrae in his back, but he survived. And the short of it is, there's some more wonderful things that happened in that story, and he's become an activist for mental health and suicide prevention. But one of the things he said, he made a vow to himself when he started out that morning, because he was going across San Francisco in a bus. He had to take a bus to get to where he's going, walk across some park area and then onto the bridge. If anybody says anything compassionate or kind to me or smiles or does anything to me today that lets them know that they have any care for me at all, I won't do it. And nobody did.
And that's all it would have taken?
That's all it would have taken for him. If anybody had said anything to me that was positive or said, how are you today, or said anything to smile at me or talk to me, I wouldn't have done it.
And what is that? I mean, I think about that, and I think about what it looks like for young people and older people now with the ease of our communications, how simple it is to, in the same energy that we go and like a post on Facebook or any of these social media, what it takes to type a couple of words and just offer some positivity.
And we can do that through that medium. I'm into that too. I'm not sitting off here some oldster. I'm not touching that electronic stuff. No, I get that, and that is so true. The face-to-face, flesh-to-flesh kind of thing is great.
It trumps everything.
And that's where we need to go so much more. I think we need to go there. But at the same time, we can use the connections that we have, even to people we have never personally met, to give them some sense of encouragement and compassion and caring, especially if we see them or hear them or read their post or anything that comes out of that post or that interaction that says, this person is really having a tough time.
Yeah. I can't tell you how many FaceTime conversations and phone call conversations and text conversations and DM conversations have spawned out of, seeing somebody's post or something out of a place and just saying, hey, I need to reach out to this person, and maybe I'm not in the same state as they're at.
Right. Maybe I've never met them.
Exactly. Maybe I'm not in the same time zone, but I feel like I can offer something here. And
definitely
there's some initiative in that, obviously, that we have to take. But one of the things that I'm reading is 20% of high school, or of that 15 to 24-year-old age group, have suicidal thoughts at a time or not. And I'm certain, as being an adult and an older adult certainly doesn't absolve you from having those thoughts.
No. In fact, the largest, the highest percentage in the most recent 2020 data from the CDC is that people who are in advanced age are the highest percentage per 100,000 right now. That's the first time that's happened. But you go back down into that young adult group, and as you said, it's the second leading cause of death. Accidents are the first, unintentional death of some form, drowning, car accidents, whatever. But suicide's number 2 for that younger group, and it's still heavy in some others. Men are more stronger, and men end up dying more often than women. But still, we have more women attempting. The intent, I think, is just as serious. Just the men end up with guns. Yeah. Literally, firearms are about 50% of the deaths related to suicide. So men are the ones who pick up that kind of a means more often than women do.
What do we do when we start to feel this energy? Because, it can be a thing that happens really, really gradually over time.
Yeah.
And it can happen so slowly and progressive, and gradually that you don't even recognize it. But it can be a thing that happens really suddenly when your predicament hits you or life circumstances happen. But what do we do when we feel ourselves kind of being sucked down to this place?
Yeah. Yeah. This is where I think it's important, if someone feels this, to reach out to someone who cares. And who's going to care. Now, I obviously come from 2 areas. In dealing with ministry, I know there are all kinds of ministers, and there are some people who have some odd ideas about suicide, I'm afraid to say. But somebody who's open-minded, somebody in a church setting who's caring and know will listen and appreciate you. But I think about professional help in the sense of licensed people, counselors, hotline numbers.
Yeah.
There's always somebody available with national hotline numbers, and that's something to remember as well.
Yeah, there's, it's not unusual. As much as we kind of put taboo around it and make it kind of a controversial thing, it's not unusual for you to have.
No, it's not. Not at all. A significant number, as you mentioned, of young people, young adults, and adults in general have those thoughts. The important thing to remember, even in talking with someone who has those thoughts, is to know that a much smaller number of, let me just draw out some numbers. I got a number real quick.
Yeah, no.
In 2020, and this is probably underreported, and some of this is extrapolated data, 12.2 million adults seriously thought about suicide, all ages. 3.2 million adults made a plan to do it, but only 1.2 million adults attempted suicide, and 45,000, almost 50,000, actually died by suicide in 2020. So the thing I think that we need to know, and what we can tell somebody who's thinking about this, just because you have the thoughts does not mean it has to end in death.
Yeah.
This is something you don't have to do. There are other ways. There's hope. There's hope in connecting with somebody who cares. There's hope in us finding help that you need. There's hope in bringing in people into the picture who already care about you. And in some cases, avoiding people who don't. And sometimes, honestly, Michael, that can be family, unfortunately.
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
the notion of always go to family, not necessarily, because the family may be, in some cases, the people who abused you and the people who traumatized you.
Absolutely.
And so we have to keep that in mind. But, you know, we can connect people with someone who cares. We can care, and we can say, I care about you, and I want to help you find and connect with the other people who care so that we can get you some help, rather than this ending up being the most drastic statistic here. Many people have suicidal thoughts who never have a plan. People have suicidal thoughts who do not die by suicide.
Absolutely.
And that's why it's important to remember there's another way. Let's find out ways to help you deal with the pain that you're dealing with the struggle that you're dealing with, in a way that can help you find new meaning in life, rather than ending it all, even though it seems like that's the only way out right now.
Yeah. So, as churches, as community institutions, as members of communities, as members of churches, as fathers, mothers, sons, daughters, sisters, brothers, neighbors, friends. Where do we put our energy in trying to help the people that are feeling hopeless, that are feeling disconnected, that are feeling like they got left behind? Where do we put the energy? Is it just in the intentionality of every interaction as we walk through life, or is it really doubling down on those relationships and doing the work of checking in with people, doing the work of, you know, going to get coffee with that person that you haven't seen in some months, or going to dinner, or the relational work that we've gotten out of the habit of since the pandemic?
Yeah, I think it's very important to intentionally, as communities of people who say we care, to really intentionally practice that. You know, to find ways to go, as you just said, to say to those people, let's spend some time together. Let's visit with each other. I think it's really important that we find ways to educate ourselves related to mental health. I mentioned mental health first aid. There's some other methods, and you can do a lot working on the internet on your own with a lot of this. There are suicide prevention sites that are quite a few of them that are valid and helpful. and the knowledge base is not anything that any particular method owns. You know, they don't have a copyright on the knowledge base here that's important. Like that thing I said earlier about always being direct about the question. Everybody who works with suicide prevention, for instance, will say the same thing: be direct. Don't hedge around. Don't beat around the bush. Be direct. Ask, are you thinking about killing yourself? Are you thinking about suicide? That's a universal. But we really, from whatever source, I think can really benefit from educating ourselves more. And in the community sense, I think that's where it helps to take advantage of some of the training opportunities that are out there, whether it's the more formal ones, more complex ones, but also can be like we're doing right here, of having somebody who has some experience in the field, professional people out of professional backgrounds who've worked with this before, to come in to our church groups and talk to us about this, to do the work on the internet, to learn for ourselves as individuals. There are many ways to do that. I think intentionally educating ourselves about some of the signs, the symptoms, what to look for, how to intervene. Just that educating ourselves more about interviewing people. How do you sit down and talk to somebody where you're really listening? We already know you care, or you wouldn't be here even wanting to talk about it, right? Okay, if you care, what do you need to do to, one, deal with your own emotions about it? Because you're going to get into some tough subjects.
Yeah.
But and really recognizing that if you let your emotions run wild, when, oh my gosh, they're talking about killing themselves. Oh, I can't tolerate. Well, even in a lot of the training, I remember I worked with a different training group called QPR, and this is a good training experience too, just on suicide prevention. Question, persuade, refer. You can find that one too online.
Yeah.
Some of these things, all they have courses online that you can take. QPR said, if you can't ask the question, find somebody who can. You care, but you're just like, oh my goodness, I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
Find somebody who can ask the question. If you can't, you recognize this is a problem, and I need to somebody needs to ask the question. But we need to deal with our own emotions about it. And one thing that I think is so important, Michael, and this is true whether one's a layperson in the mental health field or a professional, is I can't be responsible for this person's life.
Yeah, that's huge.
We can't save everybody. As a layperson, as a professional, I've been in situations, I didn't have any of my clients to do this, but I've known therapists whose clients did complete suicide. They took their own lives. And sometimes we have to realize, and it's parts of humility, it's like we are not gods. We are human beings, and all we can do is be as compassionate and caring as we can possibly be. That person has decisions that they make that I cannot control.
It's not
this
about
is
you.
not a control situation. This is a compassionate, caring, connecting kind of a situation where if I want to show care, that's what I need to do, rather than thinking I can go in and control this. We have to be aware of our own humanity and our own limits. So that's an important thing to recognize too.
That's huge.
So many people can be saved, their lives can be saved if somebody would intervene. That's what we do know. If there had been somebody with that guy jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge, just to be compassionate in any way to him, he said, I wouldn't have done it. And that's why he's so adamant about it today as an activist, we need to go out there and connect with people and let them know that we care.
And there's a huge element of probably us relinquishing our responsibility to be resources for people around us. And some of that is out of, I just don't want the responsibility. And some of it's out of an earnest place of fear of the unknown.
Yeah, I don't know what to do. Exactly. I don't know what to do. That's what I'm talking about the education part. And you take a risk now because you put yourself on the line when you say, educate me. I want to know what I need to do. that means you have some level of responsibility to follow through.
Absolutely. I mean, it is our responsibility.
But yeah, there is, if it's an aloofness, then I think we have some soul searching to do. Like what is there about me that I don't care, or that I don't want to be involved? I mean, there's some sense of compassion and caring. If you have it, you're going to want to be involved in some way. But you have to know the limits of that, because we all know people who've burned themselves to a crisp being compassionate and caring, to the point they've taken no care of themselves. The old image on the airplane, when you get on, they say, now if the oxygen mask comes, decompression occurs and these masks come down, put your own mask on first and then help others. You know why? Because you're going to pass out and you're not going to be able to help anybody.
Yeah, and ministers and mental health professionals and social workers, just about every single one of these service fields, health workers, I mean, guilty, very, very guilty of burning themselves.
It can be, it can be.
Both ends.
Learning to be someone who cares, regardless of what your role, unofficial, official is, or what you've committed yourself to do. Know your limits and know that you can't be candle burning bright 24/7.
Yeah.
Without taking some time to take care of yourself and realize I can't do everything. One of those things is control, because I think a lot of times people who tend to be, it's kind of like submerged control. I can take care of everything. I can be, it's control. You think of control being more overt than that. Back away, folks. I will take care of this. It's not quite that, that abrupt, but it's some sense of I need to be in charge and need to take control of everything. We need to figure out a way. Wait a minute, God, give me the courage to look into myself and let go of some of that, because there's no way that I can control everything.
Well, a lot of that's the community piece, right? It's the buy-in from the larger community that everybody raises their hand and says, I'm available. So now you can be off of the hook because there's somebody else to step into your place. And now suddenly we have the coverage that we need.
And that is exactly what we were saying on campus as a professional group in getting everybody interested and connected with the whole idea about mental health and what you could do with that. It's like we need your help to help us, to help everybody.
Absolutely.
Have a healthier life, and also to intercept these difficult things before they get worse, and even catch the things that are at the depths, that are at wit's end, somebody who's desperate. Help us find that person before they really do take off over the deep end.
Yeah.
And actually end life over it. We do that as a community. That's why I'm really push the idea of education, and working together to educate ourselves as a group. That's what we were trying to do on campus. And what I encourage churches to do, communities to do, and just have an agreement with each other. We're gonna hold each other up, and we're gonna help each other recognize no one of us does all of this.
Yeah.
We're not here just as, there are no, the only Savior is Jesus.
Yeah, you're just the body. We're
the human. Yeah, we are the arms, eyes, ears, feet of Jesus. I agree with that, but we're not asked to be individually everybody's hero and the one who solves all the problems. And that's where I think we really, if we have a tendency to want to do everything and burn the candle at both ends and keep it burning 24/7, trying to help people, it's time to back off and know, wait a minute, I've got to take care of myself in order to do that.
Absolutely.
I got to put the mask on me, keep myself breathing in order to be able to help others breathe.
And the truth is, if we're honest with ourselves, like we truly do some of that introspective work, we understand what it feels like to hurt. We understand what it feels like to question, to doubt, to be compelled by fear, to walk with anxiety. We understand what it means in some capacity to be depressed, and we understand the idea of being hopeless. And that's a spectrum, right?
Exactly.
And we understand these things, and we know people in our lives that maybe have struggled with their mental health. Maybe they've completed suicide. Maybe they've attempted suicide. Maybe they've, been in depressive periods. Maybe we've been in that place, but we understand that this affects each and every one of us in a huge, huge way. And just because we've stepped out of the pandemic where it's like comfortable and convenient for us to talk about these things and use these terms, we can't get comfortable with the idea of like, that's just the way it is. Yeah. Because it doesn't have to be that way.
No, it does
We can
not.
show up for each other. And it's important for people to know that are out there that are feeling this way and struggling with this and carrying some degree of hopelessness, that there are resources.
One thing I would say, Michael, I think it's important in recognizing that, because we all do have some sense of that if we're human at all.
Yeah.
We've had days when we woke up and feel like, oh, I'm not one to do this. Even if we've never had anything any deeper, it didn't last 24 hours.
Yeah.
The important thing, I think, in talking with someone who is maybe deeply caught up in depression or anxiety or any other problem and may be suicidal in the process, is not to come at it like, I understand, and pull it back into, oh yeah, I've had I've experienced.
Yeah.
We don't need to talk about ourselves like, oh yeah, I had something happen just like that. We need to be careful there. We need to take that knowledge and that understanding that we have, however deep or shallow it might be. Yeah, I get that, but not to say to the person, oh, I understand, but to let them talk and really reflect that in the sense of, that really has got to be hard. That feels really tough. When you're talking to me about that, I just get this feeling of how hard that must be. See, that's not saying, oh, I know exactly how you feel.
That's being present, and
It's
we
being
know
present.
we know what that feels like.
Yeah.
We know what it feels like to be hurt, but we also know what it feels like to have somebody be wholly present with us.
Yeah.
And to really see us and to really hear us. And that's it. That's all it is. It's just being present with one another. And you have all of these resources and all of these tools. And people like you have all of these resources and tools, and there's online resources, and there's hotlines, and there's all this information. But innately, as human beings, we all have some degree of ability to show up for one another.
We do.
And, it's important that we do at least those things.
Yeah.
David, I really appreciate your time. I appreciate your wisdom. I appreciate your outlook on life and the service that you've done over all these years. I mean, the average youth minister burns out after a couple of years, and you've been doing this ministry for the college age group for way more years than that, and continuing to pour out your wisdom and knowledge and compassion into the world. And this is important. It's important stuff. And I appreciate you being in this place. I appreciate all the stuff that you shared. I appreciate your heart for service. And if you're hurting out there and you don't know what's next, it's important that you know that it's okay to feel that way. It's okay to acknowledge the hurt that you're feeling, and it's okay to talk to somebody. Maybe it's a person like me. Maybe it's a person like David. Maybe it's an anonymous person on a hotline. Maybe it's a person online. Maybe it's somebody in your life that you care about. But it's important that you talk to somebody and that you acknowledge what's going on. But thank you for being here, David. Thank all you guys for listening. It's been a Side by Side podcast, and we look forward to talking with you again soon.
Thanks, Michael.
Gotta be side by side. Give it up. Gotta be side by side. Everyone. Gotta be side by side. Yeah. We gotta be
mean, I'm not surprised because it doesn't surprise me, but I'm more perturbed. Like, you're doing so well that I'm really disappointed that I didn't have you on the first 5 episodes.
Oh, shoot.
Now you've unfortunately raised the bar for everybody else.
Well, keep them on their toes. Just watch them out and see what you think.